the commissioner spoke. Mr. Bettman did. We're also going to, don't worry, we're going to talk about stuff like Brad Aldrich and the sort of Dawn Fury stuff too. But first, the commissioner spoke the other day, him and Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly. And I think we kind of teased as the Aldrich and more, I should call it the Kevin Beat stuff, right as all of it started really unraveling like last week. We sort of just hinted like, what's going to happen to Bettman here? And I kind of had this thought looking at this press conference. I don't know how much longer Gary Bettman's going to last as commissioner of the NHL. I don't think it will be soon he's gone. But as the days go on here, I'm starting to question it. Now, the point has been made very much, and so I'm going to be echoing a lot of people here. Sorry if you've heard this, but this was a press conference that needed to be emotionally intelligent. One person called it. I think it was Adam Wilde. It needed to have some empathy in it. Guys like Jeff Merrick have said. There needed to be compassion from the commissioner and the deputy commissioner. We've all heard them talk before. I think sometimes Daly can have a laugh, but Bettman, no. And we saw it yet again, and it was the normal talk of lawyer speak, failing to commit to anything, being on record, saying anything. It was emotionally empty, or I should say emotionally bankrupt, I think is a good word to use there. Before we get to some of the specific stuff, and I hate doing this, but I'm going to steal something from Adam Wilde. And I'm going to ask you two, how did you guys feel watching that press conference? Because I, for one, was extremely frustrated watching it. And I'll start with Alex here.
Okay. Yes, I was very frustrated, like watching it, just because. Not that I didn't. I got stuff from it. Like I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't. I got stuff from it. It was just all the wrong things to get from it. And I think I pointed it out a couple days later. It was the body language just threw me off. Their body language while talking, like their body language was saying one thing, but the way they were talking was something completely different. And it just threw me for a loop.
Bettman looked annoyed. Like the way, there's this one shot, I want to say in the back half, and he's just tapping this table. I'm thinking, you have the nerve to be mad right now? Sorry, Daniel, how did you feel watching it? Or how are you consumed it?
Okay, I think that he was annoyed, and this is just a theory I have, because probably their lawyers prime them like crazy to make sure that they just, go along with what just needs to be said and just say something to it. Because I went in to the press conference knowing that I was going to be disappointed, knowing that, again, like we talk about the culture, we talk about what's already been said on so many previous cases or even like previous incidences, that I went in knowing I was going to be disappointed, and it's still that same feeling. I know that there's still that level of understanding that, yeah, like there's something he gave to the media for them to talk about. But again, it's just short, and they were all short and to the point. And I don't know. I think there's potential here now, not from Bettman, but from the league. And it's been mentioned before. Alan Walsh, we know his tweet that maybe there is that greater level of understanding now from the owners, from management, that they have to say like, yeah, listen, we have to kind of really address this now, and we can't just let it be something again that they forget about.
I saw the Alan Walsh tweet as well. And listen, man, I love Alan Walsh. Like I agree with plenty of things that he says. To what extent is it like, whatever, it just depends on the situation. I take what he wrote in terms of owners being upset with a grain of salt. Obviously, he is an agent. He is obviously always going to be pro player. I don't know his relationship with the owners, but I'm careful in saying that the owners want him gone. It's just what my opinion. Like, do I agree with it? Not necessarily. Like I think maybe we're past the point of what Gary Bettman was brought in to do. I very much believe that. I'm weary of saying that the owners want him gone.
So for context, it's 3 tweets here. I'll just read them quickly. Again, this is from Alan Walsh's Twitter account. Alan Walsh, who we know is never afraid to voice his opinion. It's quite refreshing, actually.
Yeah.
And I mean, he is an agent, so I'm sure there are some owners, some GMs out there. They're like, oh, Alan, what do you mean you want 3 years at 6.5? I want to give you 6.1. Anyway, so here's the first tweet. Quote, I'm hearing this morning that several NHL owners are, quote, very concerned and unhappy with Bettman's leadership. I think even the owners realize it's time for a change in the NHL and culture. Only changes from the top down. It is time to, in all caps, fire Bettman. Second tweet, from the way Gary has mismanaged the horrific events in Chicago to his refusal to acknowledge a link between traumatic brain injury and CTE, for doing nothing to help retired players, for calling the NHL a, quote, family, for the Department of Player suspensions, for the way the game is marketed, for the lack of any coherent global strategy, for turning his back on issues like painkillers, Ambien, and Teradol abuse, for his lack of empathy and caring, for his 3 lockouts and all the lies. It's time for Gary to go. I think definitely what I'm surprised he didn't say in his installation of the salary cap. It feels like what Allen did very well there was remind people when right now people I don't think are on Twitter reading some of this stuff more than now, was he did a very good job of, besides this stuff with Chicago, he has just basically pointed out everything wrong with Gary Bettman's tenure as commissioner. He's done stuff well. We have complimented Gary a fair bit on the show for what he's done for the game in the States. I mean, doesn't probably do a lot of that without Wayne Gretzky being an LA King, but, and I know he came in 93, died, shut up, you know what I mean? And honestly, but then we forget how the game has been treated in Canada by the commissioner. Go listen to our episode with Will Baldwin for that. But I do think what I will say is I won't doubt that there are some owners in there. It's just, are the important ones concerned, aka the worst kept secret in hockey, besides the amount of cocaine players take. How does Jeremy Jacobs feel about this? Is how I really think about it.
Right.
Because, and again, I think it's the commissioner needs I think it's 8 owners to still be cool with him. Or don't quote me on that, but
the thing I think maybe that Alan didn't include, or Alan Walsh did not include in that tweet, and I think it is important. Is at the end of the day, if the owners want Gary there, the owners are going to keep Gary there. And he listed all these things that Gary Bettman and co have done. And he's still in 2021 and he is still commissioner of this league. So I get he's listing all these things, but the owners at some point would have said, well, come on, Gary, like this isn't how we want to run the organization, like how we want to run the league. Like that's an important thing to think of. The Gary Bettman is, in my opinion, in a way, an extension of the owners. Like he represents the owners. So what he does is also a representation of the owners. So those things he's done in the past, well, the owners don't seem too pissed off about it or pissed off enough to kick him out.
I think, this is a theory of mine. If Mark Chipman had not had that quote in his press conference, that was the Kevin Cheveldayoff I know would have acted in 2011. That was the moment where I realized I know why you're still hired right now, is the owner had his back. Now, by the way, again, we'll get to that conference later because I think Chipman said the right things, and you can tell for certain points he was being quite honest. Another sort of, we're going to go into some of the talking points here. So the big one, I think that's going to upset like us three in particular, was sort of the way, and this is not as serious as some other stuff that's going to be talked about in a second here. We will talk about the Sheldon Kennedy. We'll talk about that first. So Pierre LeBrun, who later on made sure that the NA had made the comment about maybe you should be taking a question from Rick Westhead here, asked about or mentioned how Sheldon Kennedy has not been the league have not contacted him. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, because I don't blame you. I'm not super familiar with the whole Sheldon Kennedy thing. I looked it up. He was sexually abused by, his name is Graham James. This is also the guy who admitted to sexually assaulting Theo Fleury in his junior career. So again, that was, the guy admitted it. So, of course, now the big thing that Bettman said in response to Pierre LeBrun saying, why has he not been, it was a passing note, but it was so just sort of, I'm getting a little annoyed thinking about it here. Bettman threw this side thing of like, oh, we're trying to talk to people. There's no concrete details of we're going to do it on this day. And then he had this little dig that was like, it didn't happen at the NHL level.
Yeah.
And it's just another layer of Bettman always being like, if it didn't happen at the NHL, we don't care. And it's again him ignoring the issues of hockey. And it is probably what owners love the most about Gary, about his focus in the NHL and them. But when it comes to the sport itself, it is the biggest criticism against him, that if it's beyond the borders of the NHL, he is blind to it. It's sickening to say that.
And that's it is. It's just like that very much rugby, not in a great way. And I think that goes back to the point I was making earlier. In what he was brought on to do is he's still doing the same things he was brought on to do in 1993, I think it was to kind of get the NHL under control. Like, it wasn't great. Like, the owners situation was, you think now it's bad with Arizona. It was obviously much worse years ago. But to grow the NHL, that's what his job, what he was brought in to do. And we're at a point where he has, like, and it's not him. He's obviously, the owners want him to do this too. Like, we can't just pin it on Bettman at this point. The owners and Bettman have to understand that this is we're beyond the point of growing the NHL. We're at a point where, you know what, the NHL is in decent standing. Why don't we try to grow the game of hockey? Because every other, like, look at the NBA. The NBA went into women's basketball. They created the WNBA. They're now going into Africa along with Masai Ujiri. Like, I'm not saying copycat the NBA, but they've done that in the past and it's kind of worked.
Yeah, we're not saying copy them, but we're kind of like,
get some different voices in. I think that's a big thing too. Masai, he mentioned that as well, where, and again, I'm not comparing it, but I'll use an example as he uses Toronto as a major example where, yeah, it is a big market in terms of sports, but that's what he loves about it, where he always says there's different voices and different perspectives that goes into it. And for the NHL, again, like we always talk about, where it's not growing, it is something that a lot of the owners, I feel like they're just like, it's good as it is. And we've had a different standard before on what we expect from the players in terms of responses. Let's keep it that way. Let's, in a way, and I'm not saying this is like the truth to it, but it's like eliminate like the human side to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. To me, it seems like no one wants to take major risk. Obviously, any move you make, there's going to be risk, but no one's willing to take the major risk of growing the game. No one.
We mentioned it. So I think if you look up the video, it's I want to say 54-ish minutes is the total press conference with Bettman and Daly. It's funny, Sportsnet actually disabled the comments on it, which tells you all you need to know. And the like to dislike ratio was also reflective of how you probably thought it was going. So 47 minutes is how long it took them to let Rick Westhead ask a question. Again, Pierre LeBrun, who, listen, for those of you who don't know, if you just watch like TV and your occasional insider trading, you'll see Pierre LeBrun. He's not he knows stuff. He's got the connections. He's a pretty important insider, right? You know that. In Quebec, you're gonna know him that if there's like on the LDS shows, he's on the intermission, right? He's not like Freeman or McKenzie in that regard, but what he is one of the first writers I really started, following when I was like, I want to talk about sports. And aka kind of one of the pillars of The Athletic on the hockey side, it's Pierre. So I thought, and we've only kind of seen in Twitter in passing being like, good job to this person, but I just want to give a shout out to Pierre LeBrun, to the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, saying, you know what, I hope my colleague gets a question here. And the question that Rick asked was, I'm going to paraphrase here. We know that Kyle Beach and his family, apparently the commissioner said to him, if you and your family need counseling, we'll provide that to you and all the help you need for as long as you need it. So Rick asked a very good question, in my opinion. The boy the Michigan victim of Brad Aldrich, who was sexually assaulted, Brad Aldrich was convicted for it, registered sex offender. Would the NHL provide him counseling or any support he needed? The commissioner turned around and said, I need all the details. I need more details for that. It's funny that all he has to do is look at Rick Westhead's Twitter feed and he'd know. I feel like that line is going to be Gary Bettman's legacy. Because it's another example of him just not committing. It's not even just not committing. It just shows, again, there's just no compassion in the man.
Lack of responsibility. That's how I felt about that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, listen, my hands are like, I washed my hands of this affair and everything. Like I'm not the guy you want. That's the way I see it. Because
and sir, authority here in the second, Alex. But you know what the thing was, and again, every time Gary has talked, it's been like the owners didn't know, Rocky Warts didn't know. Because here's the problem. And there's that whole thing in the John Doe 2 case about that reference, right? That apparently the Hawks deny it exists, and I don't think it's been found yet. Because if it's an NHL franchise, you're the commissioner of the league, and it is somehow proved that your negligence led to Brad Aldrich getting the job in Michigan, and then that led to what happened with the kid, I almost wonder, and this is pure speculation by me, that if it's Gary seeing that if we're acknowledging it and we're lending support to this victim and his family, who from all accounts apparently was destroyed by this, it's them almost admitting fault. And when has Gary Bettman ever been accountable? When has he ever said, I'm sorry? Because I don't think he ever has.
No, he hasn't. That line you said, I need to know more, or I don't know, it's the line of the investigation for every single press conference, every single press release. And we'll get to the Kevin Cheveldayoff one, but like, I heard it so much where it's like, I don't know if I believe you. Like I maybe believed you the first time and the second time, but when I got to the third time, I'm like it's getting to a point where you really didn't have these answers. Like, how is it that you don't know? Or it's just, come on.
Like, just want to confirm anything is from what my take is.
And it's, and it's not even just Bettman, right? Like every press release, look at like the Stan Bowman. Stan Bowman one. He was passing the blame on to someone else. Well, I thought someone else was going to do it. Kevin Cheveldayoff. Well, I didn't know, it's like, but you did. Like, it's there.
It's like, I should have been better. I know that was a big line he also said too.
The line that Gary kept using with Cheveldayoff is he expected his superiors to do it. Well, by that logic, does that mean Bowman should have a job to Gary Bettman's viewpoint? Because he also made it very clear. I thought McDonough was going to take care of it. If there wasn't an understanding in Chicago, and we don't know what happened behind closed doors, obviously, and it came to the point where he needed to have a meeting, would it have been the same then? That's what I'm starting to wonder, because Bowman sung like a bird, did he not, in that entire thing? Now, Cheveldayoff, again, there's less in that. There's next to nothing about him in the report. The Jenner and Block one is what I'm referring to. But, you see what I mean? It's like, so by your logic, Gary, and he'd probably say different circumstance, knowing him.
Well, then Joe Quenneville should have Joe Quenneville said, well, someone else was going to deal with it or whatever. Like, this is the point we're at. So it's just confusing. Like, are we going to put responsibility on someone or are we not? Because to me, we're putting responsibility on a couple people here. And it's like, well, no, there's more than a couple people involved. Like, there was a meeting. Who was at the meeting? Who knew? That's it. Like, there's no, okay, and I think they brought this up. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but
No worries.
If you were in this meeting and it was assumed that it's okay, I'm Kevin Cheveldayoff. Kevin Cheveldayoff says, well, I thought someone else was going to deal with it. 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the line, you're at the Stanley Cup parade and you see Brad Aldrich, which we know he did. He was there. Would you not be like, well, wait a second.
What's going on
Why
here?
is he still here?
So and just quickly, and from what Cheveldayoff claims is he didn't know there was a sexual assault. It was to do with a relationship or something between player and coach, which Bettman made very clear. By the way, it's still an unprofessional relationship. I know I'm talking about Cheveldayoff, but still, there is still a relationship between two people, or in this case, I should say, there's an alleged relationship between aka a person of authority, a coach, no matter what the role, a coach and a player. In that situation, you know that there's a black ace trying to get onto the team, and why is there? And he talked about apparently like phone calls or pictures. I don't think I have to really spell this out why that's probably still a red flag. You let the entirety of the series go. Not even just that. If it's like, oh, Stanley Cup parade, we're all excited. Like, it's still, you've completely missed on this. Not to mention the multiple celebrations afterwards you still see him at. There are multiple pictures that Jenner and Block have on their investigation. Like, in the report, they have like 4 or 5 different things of Aldrich being there. So, what am I missing here? Because it's what people said about Bergevin, right? It's like, okay, so he either is lying and knew, or he's just garbage at his job when he was of director of player personnel. With Chevy, you're like, man, you're an assistant GM. It doesn't matter what. And someone at the press conference with Cheveldayoff was like, they pulled this old article of him talking about his job as being a GM, and basically he was like, when Bowman was away, I was doing his job, and it was really, really good to show like what his whole job was. You know what I mean? Like, you were in charge of scouting in the salary cap, but dude, you were right there. You were right there. How many times have we seen a game? Like, watch a Vegas Golden Knights game, and they will cut, and you will see McCrimmon and McPhee there. Now, that's president and GM, but they're together. Like, they are next to each other.
Go watch a Leafs game.
Always together.
Maybe not so much now, but I know in the past, like pre-COVID, Pridham or Gilman and Dubas were in that room. Like, we're in the press box every time they pan to them. Shanahan was there sometimes too. Like, yeah, it has 11 years gone by and things changed that much.
So it's either negligence in your garbage at your job, which you clearly weren't because you were so well thought of. You were hired in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
So, and listen, it was great that they were going. It wasn't like it was like, oh God, here come the Thrashers, and everyone was so excited about that roster. No, they were not. Pretty sure they still had Evander Kane back then, did they not?
Yeah, they did.
Daniel, there you go. My historical.
He was like
reference.
21 at the time.
And probably was still getting in trouble back then. Anyway, but no, there's just, and the last thing we can talk about from Gary's press conference here is when they throw it over to Daly, and he's like, yeah, so we've concluded the Akeem Alou investigation, and we're in contact with his lawyer. It gets tweeted out, that quote, and immediately, almost as he probably had it drafted, Akeem Alou's representatives tweeted out saying, yeah, no, we haven't been in contact at all, actually.
Straight up lied.
Just a straight lie to the media. It was almost comical.
Now that, it was comical. Now that is out there, that the league said the Alou investigation was done. Alou's representative said, no, this is not done. All the journalists who are now so hard on this story, or so on top of this story, should be using their time to talk about this, man. Like this is very important. This is 2 years ago. It doesn't feel like it, but it was 2 years ago where all this came out and they started the investigation. And I think if these journalists want to hold to their word, and when they said that we're going to be there next time, next time is right now. Like this is like, yes, the Chicago story is still going on, but once this is all done, dealt with, and who knows how long that will take, the Akeem Alou story is literally right there for the picking. So prove it.
I know people were saying that Cheveldayoff was in charge of the Ice Hogs. Everything I kept seeing was he was about scouting and again the cap. But if it's true and if his job was taking care of Rockford, he would have been around and in charge of Rockford, or maybe even off by a year. But you're telling me he didn't know about Bill Peters and Akeem Alou then? No. You know, there's something special almost when you're living through moments like I was thinking to myself again the other day, how do I tell if I ever have kids? Because they're loud and they smell and they're noisy. I always used to think to myself, like, how do I tell my kids what COVID was like? And I was also thinking to myself, I'm like, man, we are probably living through right now what might be the most important story in NHL history. And right now, the big players are almost unanimously doing the wrong right now. Now, I think it's fair to move on now to over to the Cheveldayoff stuff. Are you guys cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this was with Mark Chipman, who's the head of North Entertainment, like the guys who own the Jets, True North. He was with Cheveldayoff. It got delayed a day because Chipman was sick. I think he had vertigo or something. Opens the press conference, and he didn't go into too much detail, but he did say that this was personal to him, and apparently he has a relationship with Sheldon Kennedy too. You could tell that there was sincerity there. The press conference opened with two statements from both. I don't think it was perfect from Chevy. In fact, I still don't think he should have a job. But that's me. And what I did like, credit to the Jets, even though it's kind of weird to give them credit for this. So they were alternating between in-person and Zoom questions. So the first one was in-house, you get that. Second one was on Zoom. Who did they ask first? Rick Westhead. And the first thing Rick said was thank you for taking the question. I was like, I just kind of paused and like, yeah, it's a shame he had to say that. What did you guys, I'm going to ask the same question here. How did you guys feel? What did you make of the Chevy press conference?
I mean, the bar was, I think I sent you the Mike Stevens article that put it very well. I'm just going to pull it up really quick here, but it's like the bar was on the floor and the Winnipeg Jets stepped over it. That's not an accomplishment. Mm-hmm. And I think that sums it up pretty well by Mike Stevens.
Yep.
Mike Stevens 81, not the other Mike Stevens, just to be clear.
Again, like, is what I expected going in. I was disappointed. I was going to be disappointed whatsoever. And it was the same responses over and over again in terms of responsibility, in terms of not really wanting to recall anything or say anything concrete. And I think like Kevin Cheveldayoff, it's just, I think for him, there is that, I'm not like a severe point of desperation, but there is that tone where he knew that he had to say something to really save his job, where I know he had support from True North, but really, like, when I compare that with the Joel Quenneville one, it was kind of at a point where he's like, okay, listen, I have to say something, show some level, not a huge level, but some level of remorse, but it's not a whole lot.
He did more than Bowman did, who didn't even mention Kyle. He didn't even mention, or at the time, I think when Bowman put that statement out, it was still just John Doe. He did say there are two big takeaways I had from it. One was how Cheveldayoff, and it was the proper thing to say, but he's like, someone asked him, it's like, I think it was Rick Westhead. he asked, I've been talking to Kyle the last few days, and he feels that everyone involved should have some sort of form of punishment. Cheveldayoff said this thing of everyone's being punished at different levels. Take without what you will. But he said this line, I'm going to paraphrase again here, of, I'm in a position where I can still make a change within hockey. He had this really weird line when he's like, I went down to the room, I made a big speech, and then I got a round of applause from it. No one cares. I don't care if Blake Wheeler was like, "Attaboy, Chevy," because you were still part of this. And you
seems so accurate. I don't know if I think of Blake Wheeler.
Yeah. But you know what I mean, though, right?
Yeah.
But no, he didn't say that. But he didn't say Blake Wheeler got up and gave me a fist bump going, "Hoorah!" But like he's Sergeant Johnson in Halo 2, Alien, whatever. But like, you see my point here again. Even though there is evidence, I shouldn't say evidence, because I'm not 100% on the legal thing here, but there's still a report out there that indicates you knew about. You can say if it was sexual assault or even if it was your thing, an unprofessional relationship between coach and player, which is the line he drew in the sand. That, and there was another line. Someone asked him, so what about when you said you didn't know about any meeting? And he said, well, there's context here. I was referring to people saying there was a meeting involving Paul Vincent, which, as we know, the meeting referred to at the end of the third round in 2010, it had Mike Isaac, it had Gary, it had all those guys. That one did not have Paul Vincent in it. So it was almost like, I'm not lying technically, but I am. It's so annoying that he said that.
Well, it was obviously the way, like it was lawyered.
He had
like,
that ready. He had that. He had a teleprompter in the back of the room. Yeah.
He did. Like it was clearly lawyered. In the way it was written, like it was very. I think the word I'd use is it's very deceiving, in the way it was written. That it made it. He was telling the truth, but it's like, well, like come on, like you're kind of lying, but I'm telling the truth.
Like I'm not going to be as straightforward as possible.
Yes, it was deceiving. That's I would say it was. Yeah.
I'm not going to come off as a sweating weasel like Gary when I am a complete smartass to you, but I'm still going to be like, well, like there were answers where he paused, but for that one, he's like, well, context. Like that's when you knew he was
prepared.
I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking too much into
it.
It
was lawyered, basically.
Yeah. There are a few times when like you just see like, obviously when sometimes when Gary and Bill were talking, you'd see them just kind of look at each other for something. Every time I saw Chipman just sort of turn around and look at Chevy, I'm like, I wonder if he's thinking like, your story better be straight from what you're telling me here, dude.
Yeah.
Because again, it's like when one thing from what Chipman said was the whole thing of like the Chevy I know. I just kind of thought of this now. The Stan Bowman that Jonathan Taves knows is clearly not the Stan Bowman that, failed to follow up with John McDonough as he claims it. Or, sorry, he didn't say that, but you know what I mean? The one who claims that, it was John McDonough. That wasn't the Bowman who had a part in that meeting, but I digress. One last note we should probably mention here on the controversial stuff, unless you guys have anything else to add with the Chevy and Chipman stuff.
Yeah, I just think I think the same goes for what I said about the journalist before and the Akeem Alou stuff. There were things that the way Chipman and Cheveldayoff were talking, there were some promises in a way made in terms of, making sure this doesn't happen again, advocating for change again. Like they've made these promises. They've said these things out loud. They need to be held accountable. I personally in my beliefs, I don't think Kevin Cheveldayoff should be the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets, but he is. I don't know what to say about that. But again, it's now on the journalists to make sure that they're going to do that. Hold them accountable. Like they were given a second chance, whether people like it or not, they were given a second chance. And now the journal, like we have to make sure that they are held accountable for that.